Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have Nils, Discipline Enforcer, a mono-white +1/+1 counter deck. This deck comes to us from Blocus Energy, who says, I found this deck but it's 2 years old and some of the cards might be too pricey for me. The price or budget they're looking at is that the deck has to cost approximately less than $100, and some cards might be too expensive. So we'll take a look at the deck, we'll take a look at some, cards that we can take out that will reduce the budget, and also some cards that we can put in to keep the budget low but the deck strong. As always, if you'd like to send me your own deck and I can make a video to improve your deck list, there is a link in the video description below to a form you can fill out and send my way. And if you'd like your deck to be the next deck I work on, the next video I make, there is a link down there to bring your deck to the front of the queue. Finally, this deck list will be in the description below. If you'd like to take a look yourself, if you'd like to help, Blocus make a nice +1/+1 counter deck, always fun, but with a budget. I like when decks are on a budget. I find them to be a little more fun to build around, and the restriction keeps out a lot of the more powerful cards that we simply slot into decks, and I personally really like that. All right, without any further ado, let's look at Nils, Discipline Enforcer, and talk about why they are our mono white +1/+1 counter commander. So he's a 3-mana legendary human cleric, a 2/2. At the beginning of your end step, for each player, put a +1/+1 counter on up to one target creature that player controls. Each creature with one or more counters on it can't attack you or planeswalkers you control unless its controller pays X, where X is the number of counters on that creature. So Nils is interesting because Nils is generally like a Luminarch aspirant, or maybe like the fixed, historic, or I don't know, MTGA online version of Luminarch aspirant, where on the end step, he'll put a +1/+1 counter on one of your creatures. But his second kind of ability is to spread the love amongst your opponents, with the idea that those creatures will have a harder time attacking you because they'll have to be taxed like a ghostly prison for that particular creature, depending on the +1/+1 counters they have. So there's a big political side to Nils, where you want to talk with your opponents and say, hey, who would like a +1/+1 counter? But if I'm giving you them, don't attack me. Now, Nils has that protection, but I think it's still worth talking about it, because something you can say to your opponents is like, you can choose which creature gets the counter, which sometimes isn't straightforward. They might have an idea, and in exchange, you can ask them just to not attack you at all, which is pretty easy to do. I like this, and once the politics runs out and a few rounds has gone by, well, all of a sudden, those creatures can't attack you anyways as long as Nils is on the battlefield. I'm a big fan of this. It also allows you to get some proliferation out on your opponent's permanents, which is not something we often do, but then we can grow a bunch of their creatures, and all of a sudden those creatures can't attack you, which is nice. Finally, something that I think shouldn't be underestimated is that Nils' ability obviously works when you aren't the one to put the +1/+1 counters on. I think there are a lot of strategies and a lot of very good cards that have +1/+1 counters on them incidentally, and not just +1/+1 counter decks. And so you're going to be hitting a lot of different kinds of decks and a lot of different strategies really easily. I think offhand, I think of my Brina deck, which is not a +1/+1 counter deck, but works, straightforwardly, puts a lot of +1/+1 counters. Or a friend of mine's party deck, who I can never remember the commander, even though I see her so much. Nalia, I think it is. I could be wrong. But she also puts +1/+1 counters very reliably on her creatures, despite the fact that this party commander is really, really good as a party commander, but when she's on the battlefield, all of a sudden it becomes a +1/+1 counter deck, which Nils is just soft countering all the time. So I really do like Nils as a commander. I would say, obviously, as some might think, this is a lower power +1/+1 commander because we're just in a single color, but I don't think that that's a problem. We can really make this deck cohesive. We can have a lot of redundancy for his ability and have a good time. So let's take a look at the deck itself and see if anything comes to mind. So looking at the deck, before we get any further, we can look at the curve, and we can see that the curve at 3 mana is rather high. As we often say, we want to keep the mana cost that's the same as our commander low if possible, with the exceptions being if our commander's like 1 or 2 mana or like 7 mana. So we'll come to that in a second. I appreciate that this deck is 91% competitive. I don't know to what degree I would agree with this idea. I really do feel like this is kind of a made-up statistic, but let's take a look around and let's see what we can work on. And also, what we can do, let's make another copy, because I made a copy of Tapped Out for converted cost. Let's see price. Okay, and then we can come back and take a look at the most expensive cards. Because we can see here that according to TCG or Card Kingdom, we are at least about $200 of a deck. So we do need to cut down quite a bit. And I wonder if I could actually use the Card Kingdom price. Yeah, all right, let's use that one, because that one's the higher one, so we can use that a lot more straightforwardly for our cuts. But before we take a look, actually, let's start with budget. I think there's nothing wrong with starting with budget. So I like that almost 72 of our cards are less than $2. Really, really nice. Then 2 to 5, we have 16. So let's take a look at the $20 to $100. So Wasteland seems to be Card Kingdom $20. I think this is a really easy cut. It's rare that Wasteland is that good in Commander. I think it's very, very strong in decks that can recur Wasteland and blow up lands. Oh yeah, this I can't make it too big, but it's rare for this card to be just really, really strong. If you can put it into a green deck that can cast a play from the graveyard repeatedly, that's strong. But even then, it's only non-basics, and you really have to commit to the theming. It could be nice to occasionally blow up a reasonable land, but I mean, to be honest, if you want this ability, why don't you just play Ghost Quarter, right? Because Ghost Quarter is, oh, it's $1. No, there you go. It's like 50 cents, excuse me. Destroys a land. They get a basic, but you're probably targeting something not based on the number of lands they have, but the quality of target that the land is. You already have Ghost Quarter. Perfect. I felt like that was coming. There is that Desolation Ruins. It's a newer card. Ruins. Let's go by color. Go to the bottom for lands. I was just watching someone play this. That could be wrong. Maybe it was named something. Maybe it's Ruin. But there's Desolation, right? Let me see. There's Field of Ruin, and then there's the other one. Okay, I can't remember it. But there's the other card that is like Field of Ruin. Let's say, I'm trying to see if I have it on my desk. No, that's Field of Ruin over there as well. Okay, but there is a copy of this card recently that will destroy one opponent's land and both of you get a land into play. So that's another copy if you want another version of that effect. Teferi's Protection is also very expensive for this deck. I'm going to maybe suggest a different kind of card that'll give protection, but not completely phase you out. I would say, unfortunately, this one is just probably too much for the deck. it's just too much for one card, right? When we have small budgets, now $100 is not a small budget in my mind. If we go below 50, that's a tight budget. But even when we go close to 100 and below, I think one of the things we need to consider is that we don't want a few really expensive cards if we can help it. We want the budget to be on like average, or we want the cards that we are budgeting for to be easy to pull out of our deck. Either something we can tutor or something that is reliably accessible. I guess tutor is the thing that I'm thinking of. If we can tutor the card, then we can kind of accept the fact that it's so much money, but Teferi's Protection is a reactive card. It is not a proactive card. It is sometimes useless in the game and is a 3-mana fog. And to pull that price tag in a $100 deck, that's a third of the deck about, I don't think it's earned it, so I think we should cut it. Smothering Tithe is a little tricky because it's just been reprinted in the Enchanting Tales, right? Can we get that art? No? Okay, that's fine. We can see it's at $16 on TCG Player, but that price might sink just a little further depending on how many are opened. So maybe in a month or so, check out the price again. If you can pick it up for like $13, $12, that might $12 or $13, that might work a lot better for your budget. But at the moment, if you can only grab it at $20 at Card Kingdom, I would say that's probably not worth it. Maybe 10 to 12, maybe $12 to $13 is a bit ambitious. Let's say maybe $15, it might still be worth it. But I'll leave that one up to you because it is a very, very strong card, and I recommend picking up as many as you can because this card will go back up to $40 very quickly. That being said, a lot of reprints recently, which I really like. Let's look at the cards that are $5 to $20. We can see Contagion Engine is pulling a large $15 to $20 cost. Sorry, I paused because I realized, and I didn't quite realize this, Nils counts any kind of counter, which is really interesting, which makes this very, very strong on a number of different types of counters on your creatures. That being said, I will still suggest that maybe we shouldn't use Contagion Engine just because of the price it's pulling. This card for $15 to $20 basically is a lot. It is a really cool effect. It is sometimes a pseudo board clear. Proliferate is really, really strong. But all in all, there's just going to be, this is a lot of mana. It requires 10 mana to give -3/-3 to a board. And though it is cool that you can use this against an opponent and give that board all the counters, it is technically a nombo with Nils. Let's say you've had Nils out most of the game, and during that game, you've been putting +1/+1 counters on several different creatures on your opponent's side. Well, during that time, let's say no board clears have happened, the board is progressing, and then you pull Contagion Engine. Well, the first problem is that all of your opponent's creatures have +1/+1 counters, and as you know, they don't just both stay on the creature, they negate each other. A +1/+1 counter added to a -1/-1 counter creature will just remove both of them. And so if we do, I said it backwards, but if you look at all the creatures, let's say they all have +1/+1 counters on them, right? If they have one, all of a sudden, those are negated, and all of your opponent's creatures have no counters on them. So it's actually worse than before because now they can just attack you with impunity. But if they have two +1/+1 counters, you can remove them. They still have that one counter, but you can't proliferate -1/-1 counters on these creatures. You can only proliferate the +1/+1 counters, which I guess might be something you want to do, but it's just, I don't know. I just don't see this being a particularly strong ability because almost all of the time it's going to be clunky, and almost all of the time you're going to have to lose one creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. It's just going to negate that, and you're not going to be too happy with the results. I think, though, that being said, this card will be good against token strategies, which is worth considering. But at the same time, if you have one copy of Ghost Quarter, Ghostly Prison, which you do, that's already much, much better against those strategies without the price tag, without the clunkiness. So I would get rid of Contagion Engine for sure. I should be making these cards bigger. All right. Pearl Medallion is interesting. Oops, dropping stuff. Pearl Medallion is interesting because it's just been reprinted, and according to this, you can get it for about $10. Now, I recently talked to a friend of mine about these, and he really likes the medallions. I don't. So my opinion is somewhat dependent on the fact that I don't really like them. So I will say, if this card gets any cheaper, if it gets to $8 or $9, I think it will be worth picking up. It has been reprinted. It has that kind of power to it that once it's out, the deck can get out much, much faster. It's a huge ramp card. But even with that in mind, I don't know if it's necessarily worth it. So I will let you decide at the end. I think the cost of it is the biggest part. Cavalier of Dawn is an interesting card. It's about $5. If you can't get it for $5, I wouldn't probably get it. It is a cool card, but it is a bit clunky. Luminarch Ascension, I think, is definitely a card to play, so that's fine. Command Beacon feels too expensive for what it does. Nils is only 3 mana. You can cast Nils a bunch of times. Though Nils is really, really good for the deck, I would argue you're fine if you don't have him out all the time. Yeah, it really does suck if you've been boosting your opponent's creatures the whole time, and all of a sudden they can attack you again, but it isn't like Kalia the Vast or something like that, where you desperately need your commander. So, you know, if you can get this for $5, sure, but at like anything above that, I think it's cutting into the budget too much. Emeria the Sky Ruin, I think is rather strong, so if you can budget this in, I think it's worth doing. That being said, if you can't get it for about $10, yeah, that's tricky. I think maybe this can be put off to the side and seen later if you have room for it. Immortal Sun is, I think, very good here. I think I'm pretty happy with this, even at the price. Once again, if you can get it on the lower end, you'll be happier, but I think it's fine. Then finally, Core Haven. I don't think you should have Core Haven. It shows $5 on TCG. If you can get it for $5, I think that's probably fine. But that being said, I don't know. I really don't think it's that meaningful. I think, like, you know, fogging one big creature each turn is interesting, but not necessary. And that this deck is already kind of good at fogging. Like, if you really need to stop one big creature, I would probably suggest, you know, like, just put more +1/+1 counters on it, right? Or sometimes one big creature has +1/+1 counters on it, so you're already not worried. So I think this could be cut for sure. With the cuts I've said for budget, I think your budget will go down by quite a bit. You'd have to do the final math. You might have to take out a few of the $2 to $5 cards, and maybe we'll take a look at a few of them soon, but I think generally, I'm just trying to see if any of these stick out as being particularly expensive. Settle the Wreckage feels expensive for what it does. You could probably cut that. I don't think it's really where you want to be. You're already ahead when attacks are being made. Mind's Eye being expensive is still so strange to me. This is not a card I particularly like, but if you can play it, that's fine. Cauldron of Souls, I think, is good as well, but maybe this is a very defensive card, and I'd rather just have a cheaper card that would make your board indestructible, rather than having to play Cauldron, having to hold it up, having your opponents know that you have the means to reanimate your creatures. I don't like that as much. It is cute that you can target your opponent's creatures with this, but I don't know how often you actually want to do that, so I will say you could probably cut some budget here by picking up, like, your Temple is under attack or something like that. All right, that's the budget look. Very quickly, I want to take a look. Let's see how we're doing on time. I want to take a look at our 3-drop slot, because this slot is shared with our commander. Now, Worn Power Stone is the one that looks the most confusing to me here. It's 3 mana ramp that doesn't get to our commander in the first place. And we don't have that many high mana cards that we really want to ramp into after this, so I don't think it's particularly good here. Likewise, Burnished Heart, I feel the same way. Traditionally, ramp that is 3 mana and higher is because we really, really want to hit like 5 mana, 6 mana, or 7 mana. But looking at our set, like our higher mana cards, like we don't desperately want to hit them. They are good cards, but they don't like make our deck work. So I don't think we necessarily need ramp at 3. Taking a look at Serrated Biskellion. What a strange card. I really like this, actually. Let's make it big so we can see what it is. Put a +1/+1, a -1/-1 counter on this creature and a -1/-1 counter on target creature. I've never seen anything like this. I wonder what this is from. Dual decks, most likely Weatherlight. Okay, it's a very old card, that's why. This is interesting. I think this is really, really good in the deck. I absolutely think you should have it. I think that's a fun card. That's great. I won't go too much into it because I'm sure you know how good it is by itself. Choking Fumes. Once again, Choking Fumes I feel like is going to be clunky. I don't mind these -1/-1 cards when they're like, the Biskellion is really, really good because you get to target. But Choking Fumes and the other card, the Contagion Engine, you don't have control over them. So I really don't like them. There's just going to be, basically Choking Fumes sometimes is just going to read as target creatures get one, like you take 1 less damage per attacking creature. And that's really not enough. Even token decks, you know, universally have ways to pump their tokens so that, you know, like, we know that there is, there's just like no way that this is going to wipe a board, right? Your opponents have to be incredibly confident to attack with all their 1/1s and not have like a boost. There has to be like literally 100 1/1s attacking for them to attack that way, because 1/1s are really, really good defensively, and to give up that just to go on an attack seems kind of foolish when they're going to lose a lot of those creatures anyways due to blocks. So I will say once in a while this will be good, but with how your deck works, I just don't think it's really, really good. And you don't want to hold up 3 mana like this. I don't think that's where you want to be. Redain. Okay, costs 2 more. I think these are fine. I like the Force, the Protector's Shield a lot more. So if we assume this is a 4-drop, then I have no problem with it. Collected Effort is really interesting, a modal spell, so I have no problem with it. And then Reduce the Memory. I think this should be the new card, the new one that gives a 1/1. Stroke of Midnight. I have it here, actually. Stroke of Midnight. This should be Stroke of Midnight. Okay. And I know there's 3 mana, but otherwise I think this is fine. Going back to anything else I want to talk about. Before we go into additions, I wouldn't mind going up like 2 lands. 34 seems low. We don't have that much ramp. If I look into here, we've got some ramp, but not as much as you know what? You've got a good amount of ramp, but I'd still probably go up to 36 lands, just throw 2 more planes in. I think you'd be happy with that. Even with the shelter here that comes in a land tapped, I think you really want to make sure you can at least hit your 3 mana every single time. You're in white, card draw isn't really accessible, so especially at this budget. So going up to 36 lands, I think you'll be very, very happy. Otherwise, I'm trying to think of anything else that really stands out to me. And I think Approach of the Second Sun is kind of weird, but it is a finisher, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. And otherwise, I think the deck does generally make... Oh, right. Sensei Golden Tail is a really weird inclusion, especially considering that it's like above $1, which means it is pulling more weight, right? Because if every card is $1, that's $100 right there. So cards that are over $1 at any point need to be good. And I don't... Okay, I see. You put training counters on your opponent's creatures. Uh, I think that's cute. Like, don't get me wrong. I think it's cute to be able to put a bad counter or a useless counter on your opponent's creatures, but I think there's going to be better versions of this. I think there's better things that we can do to do that. It's sorcery speed, it's 2 mana. Yeah, after that you can endlessly proliferate it, but I don't know. I don't think this is where it's at. I do think it's cool to make your opponent's creatures samurais, but like I think it's a bit much for the deck. I don't think it has room for cards like this. All right. All right, let's look at some additions that I have here. And let's see, I'm going to say generally in no particular order. Let's start by taking a look at Einok Bondkin. This is another Outlast creature, and I think the only one you're not playing, if I'm correct. And I will say, for what it's worth, First Strike is really good at lower power. It lets you attack with creatures, and it lets you kind of, you know, attack without needing to worry about the attack getting through. So what I'm thinking of is there's going to be a lot of situations where you could play this turn 2, turn 3 play Nils, and all of a sudden you have a 3/2. Oh, I guess that's end of combat, so that one doesn't work. But after a turn cycle, you have like a 3/2 First Strike, which I think is particularly strong at this level. And after that, all of your creatures, as they grow, just having First Strike is going to be nice and clean. This is a 2-drop, which I think you could use a few more of, but it's also a very cheap card, and you'll be really happy to have this. A weird one that I saw was Regna's Sanction, where it's another kind of political card where you choose friend or foe, and each friend puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control, and each foe chooses one untapped creature they control and taps the rest. So, I like this. This is a weird card, but I really, really like this. This is a heavily political card. Obviously, one might be might say that's obvious with the friend and foe, but it's a little more than that, right? The first thing that's good about it, obviously, is early, when everyone is just hanging out, no one has low life, everyone's your friend, right? Everyone gets a full board of +1/+1 counters. This works really well with your commander. It boosts your board. You're generally very happy, and your opponents now have something to fight over on each other's boards, right? All of the boards got bigger. None of those boards can easily attack you. All of a sudden, they're going to attack each other. Pretty good. But as we get closer and closer to the later game, foe as an option gets better and better. Not just because the dream of going choose yourself as a friend, all your opponents are foes, and then attack all of them is really, really, fun, but that actually opens up situations where you are purposely going to use friends and foes in order to force your opponents to attack each other. If you play this card and you look and you ask if it resolves, and it resolves, you can start a conversation. Certain opponents can be friends on the with the restriction that they have to attack the foes, or certain opponents that were already planning on attacking foes might just get stronger boards. The strongest player might become the foe, with the other two players, if they're, depending on turn order, incentivized to attack them. Remember, if you're not attacking with this, the player directly with your left should be your friend, because there's just no reason to make them a foe because they're about to untap, right? Something to consider. I think this card is really, really good despite its cost, both mana and money. I think it's really cool. Maybe I'll pick up a few. I think this is an interesting card, and I think I've really overlooked it and never seen it. Another one with this character in it is Together Forever. Together Forever is interesting because you're really playing it for that activated ability. As long as Nils has one counter on him, right, and you have 1 mana up, your commander will always cost 3, and I do particularly like that. That's not including the fact that you can get any creature back, because most of your creatures should have +1/+1. And finally, as always, you can target your opponent's creatures with it, which is really, really interesting. And though, once again, you generally don't want to do this, there might be situations where you can make a deal with this. considering the mana cost of it, I think you'd be really happy to be able to do this. All right, let's take a look at a few more cards that interact with +1/+1 counters. The first one is Dusk Legion Duelist. I think you're just really, really happy with this card. Now, it does eat up your Nils target until you have Proliferation. Once you have Proliferation or another means to put +1/+1 counters, you'll generally be happy to, like, you know, just proliferate and then later use the Nils target on something else on your board. But drawing an extra card per turn is really, really good. If you can curve Dusk Legion Duelist on, I keep thinking of the Zealot, the Duelist on turn 2 into your commander on turn 3, drawing a card, you'll be pretty happy. That's a pretty nice setup to start moving forward in the game, so I do really, really like it. Two cards that are like copies of our commander. Noble Heritage is just very, very good. It does basically the same thing as your commander, but unlike a lot of your commander, like replacements for your commander, this one only does work with your commander out, which I don't love, but this card is a lot better than it seems. So it gives 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature. You don't get to choose, right? Unfortunately, you have to. You get to choose your own, and each player chooses their own. They also choose if they want to, but if they do, you have protection from that player, which means your creatures aren't protected, but their creatures, abilities, cards can't target you, can't damage you, can't attach to you, I guess, with like curses and stuff. But generally, this ability is going to be really, really strong. It is 2 mana to get 2 +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures a turn, which shouldn't be underestimated. And the amount of times that you're just going to, you know, get to not even have to have the political conversation. You get to let this trigger first before Nils, right? And then when you get to your end step, Nils is going to trigger then, and you're going to think to yourself, okay, now with the knowledge of Noble Heritage, maybe I can make deals with more information, which I think is really, really good. A card that I've referenced already that is a more straightforward, you know, version of your commander is Luminarch Aspirant. This card has somehow dropped because it's been, I think, in a commander set and probably printed a lot. This card is really, really good. I would honestly, maybe this is also on my list to pick up more copies. If you're ever playing +1/+1 counters, you're going to be pretty happy with this card. It is a very straightforward engine, and though late game, it doesn't feel very good, early to mid, you're going to be happy to just always get another trigger of a +1/+1 counter. Finally, and I've been kind of keeping this close to the chest because I think this is the best one, and people who view my other videos already know I'm going to bring this up, but Filigree Vector is a stupid good card. It is so, so strong. I think this card is consistently underappreciated. Now, it just might be that these commander decks were opened a lot, and maybe the set boosters were opened a lot for those extra copies, but this card is just ridiculously strong. Not only regularly, but even more so in your deck, because this doesn't target your own creatures. This targets all creatures, or up to all creatures. So you can play Filigree Vector and immediately put a +1/+1 counter on every creature on the battlefield to work with Nils really, really well. But in addition, this also puts charge counters on artifacts. And I believe you have two, let me confirm that. You have 2 cards here that have charge counter and charge counter. So you already do actually have artifacts that care about that. Not to not mention, where are we? Power Conduit that also likes removing extra counters. So you can put a counter on every artifact for free, but you can also put counters on your opponent's artifact creatures, right? So let's say, for example, they had their own Filigree Vector. You can put both a +1/+1 and a charge counter on it, which will be very, very good because Nils, once again, doesn't care about the kind of counter, just the fact that they're there. So I think these will be good additions. This especially. If no other card, this card for sure. All right, and then I have about 6, maybe 7 just good white cards. Brave the Elements is just a very, very strong card when you're in mono white. I really recommend that you always play this in mono white. Once this is out, this just makes certain attacks unblockable. It works like a fog as long as you have enough blockers. It protects from removal. It stops, red-based board clears, which is really, really relevant in a deck like this, though you are kind of protected from +1/+1 counters. But overall, really, really good card. I would really recommend picking up a copy. Hopefully you can get it under $2, and you'll be pretty happy with that. After that, I have both Knight of the White Orchid and Loyal Warhound. Both of these are ramp cards as long as you are behind on lands. And both of these you can get under $1 Obviously, Knight of the White Orchid is much cheaper, but if you could pick these up, you're going to be very happy. As the white player, as long as you're not the first player, these will always trigger. But even then, it's expected if there's a green player around, they'll have more. If they ramp once, all of a sudden these cards are really, really good. So use them appropriately. You'll find that the ramp is really nice. And both these creatures are pretty friendly to just have a +1/+1 counter on them. Something that kind of works in multiple ways is recommission. I think this works really well in your deck. It will reanimate anything up to and including your commander. It'll give them a +1/+1 counter, which is really, really nice. But also, I'd like to add that it will also reanimate some of your artifacts that you probably care about, with Power Conduit being probably the best example, but even Contagion Clasp or Endless Atlas might be worth doing. I didn't read this because I didn't want to, but it's got too much word on it. But I do like that. Okay, I like this a lot more than Sensei Golden Tail. But all of your 2 mana or lower cards are very, very strong. So Recommission is particularly strong against them. Then I have both courts in here, Court of Ardenvale, Court of Grace. Unfortunately, neither of them are +1/+1 counter setups. I do like Court of Ardenvale a lot more, obviously, because it brings back your permanents, but Court of Grace making creatures that you can put counters on is nice. The main reason I want both of these is for the Monarch. Because you are a political deck, you do have the means to make it so your opponents cannot attack you profitably or with ease, and all of a sudden, keeping the Monarch for a turn turns on the second mode of these abilities, these cards, which are really, really good. But also, just having the Monarch and having an extra draw per turn is pretty good. And if you aren't the Monarch on your turn, you might be able to cut a deal with the player that has the Monarch, trading in 1 damage with one of your creatures or whatever's the lowest to get the Monarch, to maybe give them the +1/+1 they want, or to put the +1/+1s on an opponent's card the way they want, which I think will be really good. Get the Monarch back, draw a card, keep going. And the last card I want to suggest is kind of an interesting one. I haven't said Thalia. I should say Thalia. So before we get there, both small and I guess medium-sized Thalia are really good here. I think you should play both of them. I didn't say that. I should. Oh, she has gone up in price. Never mind on big Thalia. But little Thalia should be cheap, under $1, whichever version you want. I think you'll be really happy with her. You don't have a lot of non-creatures, and she's very, very fun with +1/+1 counters. But that's always gets suggested by me. But Rule of Law, likewise, I think is really interesting. You are mono white, which means it's not common that you'll be casting multiple spells a turn. And so I leave it up to you to decide whether or not you want either Rule of Law or other Rule of Law effects like Archon of Emeria. These cards can be really, really good in certain pods, and sometimes they just don't do anything. So I leave that up to you. I think it's a very strong card as long as you mean to just cast 1 spell a turn, and it lets you hold up extra mana for your instants and your instants to be played on other people's turns. All right, that's basically it. In conclusion, or to reiterate, I think you should go up a few lands. I've said a bunch of cards that I think are expensive, but A lot of these more expensive cards, oh, I guess I closed it, but a lot of the more expensive cards we could probably cut. Like you thought the same thing, so I think I'm with you on this one. Cut the more expensive stuff. Cut a few of the 3 mana cards if you can. Definitely think about Sensei Golden Tail. And then if you're looking at these cards and trying to figure out what to put in, I would say Regna's Sanction, Dusk Legion Duelist, Luminarch Ascension, and Filigree Vector are probably the strongest ones by far. And then after which I would maybe look at the Loyal Warhound and Knight of White Orchid first. The rest of the cards I think are rather good and you'd be happy with the inclusions, but I almost want to end on this card because it's just so good. Please, goodness, play it. It will make your deck so strong. I hope this deck assist was helpful to you. If you'd like to send me another draft of the deck, there is a link in the video description to do so. And if you would like your deck to be the next one I take a look at, there's also a link for that as well. As always, if you can like, comment, subscribe, I would be very grateful. The channel is still growing, and I wouldn't mind, any extra help to grow it faster. We are approaching the time that I'm going to have to take a little break from the channel in about a month because it will be my wedding. But until then, I'm really excited to see more decks, and I'm excited to see more interesting budget style decks. These are my favorite, honestly, to work on because I think they're the most interesting. Thank you so much, Blocus Energy. Always a fan of the decks you send, and I hope to hear from you soon, and good luck with the deck.